One easy thing to do to make a background for art journaling, and I know I've already just said this page, but that's okay, is to use a water-soluble product like, or medium rather, like Neo Colors. And they are just water-soluble crayons. My kids in my class at the art studio, the Art Words class that I do, they love them. Huge hit, and adults love them too, honestly. And I have this little kit. I think you can buy them individually though, but really you can at least start with a basic selection of colors. And they write and draw just like crayons, but they are water soluble in that when you add water to them, they react like watercolor. And they are really, really cool. And then I also have another water-soluble medium is gelatos and Faber-Castell, or however they're pronounced. I never get the pronunciation on these correct. There's the red. These are also wonderful, and they're like art chapsticks. They kind of look like, they are the lipstick of art journaling, people. Gelatos. That's what they look like anyway. So there are those. And I'm going to just do a quick, let's do a red. Let's do red. And all I do is if I want, you know, like kind of movement of color across my page, or I just want a suggestion of color, I will just, and it's kind of like going back to elementary school, isn't it? Where you can scribble. We are not worried about lines here, folks. Only the ones we're making in our journal. That's the only thing we're worried about right now. We're all about coloring outside those lines. And I like to just quickly, and you see how fancy my brushes are. They're Crayola. For art journaling, it doesn't have to be fancy. It just has to be able to be used. That's all. I'm kind of rough on my brushes anyway, so these suit me just fine. And I like to just add, see what I mean about being able to pour that gesso right where you want it? I like to add a little gesso and then work that into that water-soluble medium. And you see how it kind of, and I'm just doing broad blocks of color here. I'm not being too worried about detail because this is a background and this is your basic. You want to work big to small, back to front when you do art journaling or art in general. Okay. So I'm continuing to work that gesso into that. And these are the crayons. That was the gelato. These are the crayons. And the crayons, you can kind of still see the marks behind the gesso, which is kind of cool. Details are awesome in art journaling. I believe I just read something by, I believe it was an artist by the name of Seth Apter. And he said something that was really interesting. He said, you know, it's all about the history of the page. And this may not be a exact quote, but he was talking about how the history of the page, the history of the layers that you do, even if nobody really knows what exactly went on behind your layers that you're painting here, you do. And it all adds up into the final piece. Even if you only see suggestions of what you did in the final layer, it all adds up and it all comes together to make that final piece. Some black gesso. And again, with the drips. And I'm going to show you another handy tool that I like to have on hand. Gift cards. They are awesome for swiping color or black gesso, as the case may be. You see how you get, it's kind of neat. And I like with the gesso, the black I like kind of the edges. I like that. And that's all I need to have start a background. There you go. Boom. But I like these gift cards. I think this was a Walmart card, maybe. And bucks, Starbucks. And they're good for swiping and doing kind of a nice, you know, quick alternative to like a palette knife maybe, although you get really neat effects with a palette knife that you just can't get here. I also like to use them if I'm sitting in my chair and art journaling. I will use this as a makeshift palette. I'll do tiny, tiny drops of paint and mix right on here if I just need a little bit. So that comes in handy. So that's a quick background. And then I'm going to go right on top of this and see if I can do this. Speaking of palette knives, and I have the handy dandy metal kind. I'm sure there is a name that I'm supposed to be mentioning, but I can't recall what brand these are. I think I got these at Michael's, either Michael's or Amazon. And they come in different sizes. I even have a huge one that looks like something you would use in the kitchen. It's big, spatula looking, and I love it on my larger canvases. But this, and I know this is still a little dry, or wet, excuse me. This is good for when I want to add texture with gesso. And sometimes I will add it, I won't add it to the page. I will actually lay a line of gesso right on the back, and I see a fuzzy, right on the back of my palette knife. My very obviously well used and not clean palette knife. I don't know when I got in the habit of that or why, but it's just turned into a thing and I've gone with it. So I'll take a line of gesso, and just sometimes I want to make texture on the page, and I'm not pushing hard here. Obviously there we go. Drip a little bit on there. The black is not quite dry because you see the gray peeking through there, but I like to make texture with this, and I'm not pressing hard because this isn't about mixing in. It's about creating that texture to sit on the page. You want it to sit on the page. This is really fun to do, and then let it dry. You can even build up your texture. That is to say, to let that dry and then add another layer on top, and then continue to go, and you're building up your layers. And then as that dries, or after it dries, excuse me, it's really fun to come over with like a wash of a water-soluble medium, like either the crayons or the gelatos, or you could even, if you have it on hand, you could even come through with a glazing medium mixed with a little dot of fluid acrylics, and that will get you some really, really neat effects. In fact, I think I have an art journal page that I have that on. Let me grab yet another art journal. Don't know if you can see that, but this is behind the scribbles and things. It's just white gesso that I used a palette knife and did across my page. And then I went over the top. I just took I think it was a dirty brush that had the yellow on it, and it had mixed with the gray from the white and the black gesso. And I just washed, and then I wiped away with a baby wipe or a slightly damp paper towel, and then I just kept doing it until I got the effect that I really wanted. And like I said, I could have gone further with this and added even more texture, and I might still do that. But adding texture is another way that gesso can be used. And it goes with any of the gessos. You can use that. Be it a texture that's strictly visual or a texture that you can actually reach out. I tend to reach out and touch because I can feel that. And that makes me happy. So another fun thing to do. And that's if you're using an old book for an art journal, or you just have pages of an old book and you want to glue that down into your art journal or rip it up, do whatever you want. Another good thing to do, and it's quick, is to lay that gesso in either with a palette knife or with a swipe of your gift card. Cover an old book page and kind of leave some of the words where you can see them. That's why the palette knife or the gift card can be kind of cool to do this with, because you can still see a little bit of your words, because that's what makes it fascinating, is that it's a book page. And you kind of want to see that. Now some gesso, depending on the quality of it, and as it dries, you can kind of see here, this is drying, and you can begin to see the words. You can still see the words through it a bit, through here, and that's okay. We want to see that. Now these are book pages, but I swiped leftover color that were left in the palettes from my kiddos' art project at our class yesterday. And you know, I don't like paint to go to waste, so I just swipe real quick. And I mean, it's messy and it's fast, but sometimes when I'm going to do something over this, that may be a little much, depending on what I want to do. Now, I'm like loving the color, but if it's something that I kind of want to take that color back a bit because something else on the page should be the focus and not necessarily the color, gesso is the perfect way to do that with. A little watered down gesso, because what it does, you see how it's making that color. You can tell it's still there, but it's not quite as in your face as it was. And it's also taking the book page writing back a notch too. So it truly becomes, when I say knock back, it truly knocks it back. So it becomes truly your background, and it's not center stage so much anymore. So knocking back, it's a thing.